Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really zeroing in on what looks like a pretty critical moment for anyone invested in biotech, specifically Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals and their upcoming earnings call.
Yeah, absolutely. We're aiming to cut through the noise and get right to the core intelligence you'll need.
Because this isn't just, another quarterly check-in.
Not at all. They've got key therapies deep into late-stage development. Their strategy seems to be crystallizing. This call could really shift perceptions about Arrowhead's path forward.
Okay, so we've identified three sort of main narratives to unpack today.
Yeah.
First, what's happening with ARO-RAGE for asthma and its partnership prospects.
Right. Then there's the buzz around their cardiovascular asset, ANG3, Zodasiran, especially being wholly owned now.
And finally, the big one, maybe the speculation, the rumors swirling around Plozasiran, ARO-APT3, and potential surprise news.
Exactly. Each one tells a part of the Arrowhead story right now. ARO-RAGE, well, that seems dependent on finding the right partner.
Zodasiran tests their ability to execute late-stage development solo.
And Plozasiran, well, it's getting close to the finish line, potentially. Could be a massive inflection point.
Okay, let's jump right into ARO-RAGE for asthma. Now, people might remember talk about a phase 2b trial starting late last year, 2024. That didn't quite happen.
No, and what's interesting is the shift in strategy. We heard back in February on their Q1 2025 call that they were actively looking for a partner.
Could take over phase 2 and beyond.
Exactly. The rationale given was basically the sheer complexity and, frankly, the cost of developing a drug for massive indications like asthma and COPD all on their own.
That adds up, especially when you look at the phase 1/2 data they already have.
Yeah.
The ARO-RAGE 1001 trial, it showed some, pretty significant results.
Definitely dose-dependent reductions in soluble RAGE, S-RAGE, which is, a key target in asthma inflammation.
You're talking, up to 88–90% reduction in the blood?
Yeah, in serum, and around a 75% average drop in the lungs. That's quite substantial.
And importantly, the safety side looked good, too, in that phase 1/2 study.
Very encouraging. No serious adverse events related to the drug. No one dropped out because of it. Plus, the effects seemed durable.
Suggesting maybe dosing every couple of months?
Potentially, yeah, once every 2 months, which would be, a real advantage for patients.
So that trial, NCT05276570, the primary data collection wrapped up around, end of March this year?
Correct. And it's listed now as active not recruiting.
Which usually means they're digging into the data, right?
Yeah.
Analyzing everything.
Precisely. And this leads us right to the upcoming call. The preview materials we saw from May 2025 suggest investors are really eager for any new safety or biomarker findings from that study.
Even though enrollment's technically done for the main goals, they still want updates on the overall program status.
And importantly, how Arrowhead values this asset now, given they plan to partner it out for the later stages.
So if you're listening to that call, the big question for ARO-RAGE is, can you read between the lines? Any hints, any carefully chosen words about partnership talks?
That's the key takeaway. It's a crucial piece to listen for. It really speaks to their capital allocation strategy.
Making a calculated decision despite promising early results.
Right. Okay, let's pivot now. Let's talk about their lead cardiovascular drug, ARO-ANG3, Zodasiran.
This one's highlighted as a flagship late-stage asset in the call preview materials.
Yes, it targets NDPTL3, involved in cholesterol and triglyceride regulation.
And after that positive phase 2 HOFH data, the Gateway study, everyone's watching for phase 3 plans.
Absolutely. So investors will be listening very closely for updates on, are those phase 3 studies starting? What do they look like? Importantly, what are the expected timelines for getting this to regulators?
And it's a big deal that they're pushing this forward alongside Plozasiran.
It really is. It's a test of their capabilities running 2 major late-stage programs concurrently.
Especially since, as you said, they kept the rights to Zodasiran, unlike the RAGE approach.
Which brings up the strategic value question. This unpartnered cardiovascular franchise, some estimates put it around, $1.5 billion?
So management's going to get asked, right, what's the long game for Zodasiran? Go it alone commercially, or maybe look for a partner down the road.
Exactly, especially in this market. Trying to launch a potential blockbuster solo, that's a massive undertaking. How do they weigh that risk versus the reward?
Okay, which tees up perfectly the topic that might bring the most excitement or perhaps surprise on this call, Plozasiran, ARO-APOC3.
Targeting severe hypertriglyceridemia, SHTG, and that rare condition, FCS. And this one is really far along.
Targeting APOC3, another key player in triglycerides.
Yeah, the phase 3 Palisade study for FCS, that's fully enrolled. And the big cardiovascular outcomes study, CAPITAN, is underway.
And the data so far has been strong. Good triglyceride lowering, decent safety.
Yes, very positive on efficacy, and the safety profile looks favorable. Plus, it snagged those helpful FDA designations Breakthrough Therapy and Fast Track.
But here's the kicker, the timeline. They submitted the NDA, the application for approval, late last year.
And the FDA accepted it back on January 17th this year. They set a PDUFA date.
November 18th, 2025. That's really not far off. Potential approval late this year.
So the earnings call preview is spot on. Investors want confirmation on that PDUFA date, updates on the Capitan trial status. But the real speculation.
The potential Novartis partnership.
Exactly. That's where the possibility of a major surprise announcement lies.
This came up in that ARWR PP55 analysis back in February, right?
Mm.
Let's unpack why this rumor has legs.
Well, the logic seems pretty solid, actually. You've got Plozasiran, advanced stage, good data that's attractive.
And Novartis.
Novartis seems to be, shall we say, reinvesting in RNAi for cardiovascular, especially after Leqvio's success. They have a focus on cardiometabolic diseases. And importantly...
Deep pockets. They have the cash.
Exactly. A potential synergistic fit. And it wouldn't be unprecedented, would it?
No, we've seen similar deals. Sarepta Vertex is one example. And Novartis themselves buying the medicines company for Plozasiran, which became Leqvio.
Right. That analysis even sketched out a possible deal structure. Arrowhead keeps the U.S.
Novartis gets ex-U.S., and their China subsidiary, Vizurna, handles China.
A logical split. And the suggested financials were pretty eye-opening. Upfront payments potentially in the $500 million to $1 billion range.
Wow. Plus milestones up to $1.5 billion, and maybe 15–25% royalties outside the U.S.
Think about that upfront number, $500 million to $1 billion. That would be, well, transformative for Arrowhead's balance sheet. It fuels everything else. Potentially, yes. Novartis expands its RNAi footprint with a near-market asset, plugging it into their global machine.
And Arrowhead gets a huge chunk of non-dilutive cash to fund the U.S. launch of Plozasiran. Plus, they leverage Novartis' international muscle. And it fits with their Vizurna setup in China.
It aligns very well. So for everyone tuning into the earnings call, yes, listen for the standard updates, but really hone in on the language around Plozasiran.
Any nuance, any phrasing that might hint at whether these Novartis talks are real or advancing. A surprise here could really move the needle.
Absolutely. Which boils down to the key questions investors really need answers to on this call.
Okay, let's list them out. Number one, any real news on an ARO-RAGE partnership? Yes or no? Or maybe.
2, that PDUFA date for Plozasiran, November 18th, are they sticking to it? Any concerns?
3, ARO-ANG3 Zodasiran. Where are we with starting those crucial phase 3 trials? What's the timeline looking like?
Then stepping back a bit, what's the bigger picture strategy for the cardiovascular assets they still own, like Zodasiran, especially if Plozasiran gets proven they need to launch it?
And always, the financials. Cash on hand as of March 31st. What's the burn rate? Are they still confident about funding into 2028?
Can't forget that. And finally, something a bit less tangible, but just as important.
The overall vibe from management. Their tone. How transparent do they seem?
Yeah, are they confident? Do they answer questions directly? That tells you a lot.
Putting all that together should give us a much clearer picture of where Arrowhead stands.
Definitely. This call feels like it carries more weight than usual, especially with Plozasiran potentially nearing approval and big strategic decisions looming for the rest of the pipeline.
Agreed. The information coming out of this call is going to be really vital for understanding Arrowhead's near-term potential and, frankly, its long-term value in the whole RNAi space.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on after the call. Really consider how these potential partnerships, especially that speculated Novartis deal for Plozasiran, could fundamentally alter Arrowhead's trajectory.
And not just Arrowhead's, but maybe the wider competitive landscape for RNAi drugs, too. Definitely something to think about and dig into once we hear what management says.